All right, how's it going, everybody? We are doing a very quick discussion of the PowerPoint that I sent you guys. If you haven't had a chance to download the PowerPoint or you're having difficulty, you can use this and kind of pause and take notes from the video. Otherwise, basically, I'm going to try to just go through each slide, explain a little bit. I'm going to keep it really, really brief. Ideally, I'd like to take a little more time on each slide, but I'm just going to give you a few things to remember, a few key points, and kind of go through the whole PowerPoint pretty quickly. And then we can definitely discuss some stuff in a little more detail when we get a chance. So this first slide is all of the human body systems. So you'll see skeletal, integumentary, which would be like your skin, lymphatic, which are lymph vessels and lymph nodes, which have very important immune functions, respiratory, nervous, muscular, digestive, urinary, cardiovascular, which is the one we're talking about today, endocrine, and then reproductive. Okay, so these 11 systems, notice the male and female are separate, but they're the same type of system. So these 11 systems are what we're covering for the human body. We won't have individual PowerPoints and lectures for each one, but we're definitely going to cover a little bit about all of them. And today is cardiovascular. All right, so we have kind of an overview of the cardiovascular system. We have a heart for pumping blood. The blood itself, obviously, is very important. The vessels, arteries, veins, capillaries, those are key components as well. We have kidneys, which help filter, and we got quite a few other systems that interact with the cardiovascular system. There's about 66,000 miles of blood vessels within your body, which is incredible. It actually will go around the Earth 2.5 times. So it's just mind-boggling to think that we have, that many blood vessels that are contained within our body. But we have to get blood to every single part of our body in order to keep those cells alive. So very important function. We're going to start with the heart, which is a muscular organ used for pumping. And we're just going to kind of get a brief overview of what makes up the heart and what it does. So first of all, the heart itself is a muscular organ, but there are a few components to it. We have the parietal pericardium, which is kind of an outer covering. Peri means around, so this goes around the outside of the heart and kind of protects it. Then the visceral pericardium, which is underneath that, followed by the myocardium. Myo means muscle. So this is your actual muscle cells, the muscle fibers. Okay, that's the myocardium. And then inside of that is the endocardium. Endo is on the inside. So this would be, if you were to actually cut the heart in half, the inside wall would be the endocardium. Okay. The muscular contractions are accomplished by the myocardium, but all of these layers have roles in helping protect the heart and helping the heart function. Inside the heart, we have 4 chambers. Okay, notice the right and the left are opposite of what you're looking at. So when you look at a picture or a diagram of the heart, what you see on the left is called the right. So it's really your own body. That's how we name these structures. So if you think about your own body, the right side of your heart, okay, would be the right atrium and the right ventricle. Atrium is on top, ventricle is on the bottom. And then the left side would be your left atrium, left ventricle. So we have 2 atria. Those are the top chambers. Those are a little smaller. They collect the blood. And then we have 2 ventricles, which are a little larger, a little more muscular, and they're going to pump the blood out. Okay, so the collecting chambers, left and right atrium, and then the pumping chambers, the left and right ventricles. Blood flow of the heart. So, if we want to start somewhere, we can start with the body, okay, right here. So we see the body is, obviously the blood is circulating throughout the body. It's sent to the heart by veins, and all the veins pour into one vein, the vena cava. And that vena cava then connects to the heart. That vena cava is going to dump blood into the right atrium, okay? The right atrium collects all of that blood. Now, it's It's labeled blue here. Blue means deoxygenated, but it's not actually blue. We don't have blue blood. We don't have blue blood vessels. All right, we have deoxygenated blood and blood vessels that carry deoxygenated blood. Those are going to be more of a dull or darker red. And then we have oxygenated blood, which are going to be more of a bright red. The iron, has that bright color when it's full of oxygen, when it's holding on to oxygen atoms. So we color them blue and red. They're not actually blue and red. Okay. So the right atrium collects the blood. Okay. That's going to pump it down to the right ventricle when it contracts. The right ventricle then pumps it up to the pulmonary artery. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. So the pulmonary artery is blue here because it's carrying deoxygenated blood. All right. It's the only artery that actually carries deoxygenated blood. Okay, and then that goes to the lungs. Pulmonary means lungs. Okay, so the lungs obviously fill the blood with oxygen. So when it comes back to the heart, okay, by the pulmonary vein, okay, veins return blood to the heart. It's now oxygenated. Okay, so we have the red pulmonary veins over here on the right. They empty the blood into the left atrium, okay, which pumps blood to the left ventricle. Okay, the left ventricle then contracts. That has the largest muscles because it has to pump blood all throughout the body. So the blood gets pumped through the aorta. Okay, the aorta pretty quickly branches off to go to the upper part of the body, to the arms, and then also down to the lower part of the body. Okay. All right. The blood that leaves the heart and these arteries, it starts to branch off into smaller and smaller blood vessels as it spreads out. Those are called arterioles. And eventually they get to capillaries. Capillaries are the thinnest, smallest blood vessels. They're very small, so they can branch out and cover a lot of area. And they're very thin walled so that oxygen and carbon dioxide and other gases can be exchanged from the cells around them to the blood inside. So the blood doesn't actually leave the blood vessels and go into the cells or anything like that. The oxygen simply diffuses out and the carbon dioxide diffuses in. These capillaries can sometimes be so thin that the blood has to actually travel single file through. So a blood cell might be like 10 micrometers wide, and the blood vessels might be about 10 micrometers wide. So the blood cells have to kind of actually squeeze through to get through these really, really thin capillaries. Eventually, the blood then starts returning to the heart. We call these venules, and then the venules collect into larger and larger veins. The veins typically have thinner walls because the blood pressure isn't as high, but they can have bigger diameters, so they can carry more blood without blocking the blood flow. Okay. Here we see a cross-section of an artery. Notice they have a thick wall because the blood pressure is high, so it has to contain that blood pressure. And arteries, compared to capillaries, have a much larger diameter. Okay. And then capillaries are going to have a very, very thin wall, a single layer of cells, so that we can exchange gases back and forth and nutrients and other things very easily. And then we have the veins, which have a large diameter but very, very thin walls because the blood pressure isn't as high here. Okay. All right, this is an electrocardiogram. You might hear an EKG used kind of in a similar way. So, what you're seeing here is a heartbeat. We're not going to talk much about this, but, I felt like I should at least show you this. We have, the electrical impulses that basically, make our heart beat. And so we're measuring those electrical impulses, and you can see the peaks and the valleys that show us one single beat. So here we have 1 second, and in that 1 second we see the heart, heartbeat. So you can actually figure out how many times the heart beat in, say, 3 seconds, and then kind of extrapolate that to your heartbeat over a minute, which is what we call your pulse. All right, cross section of the heart here. You can see the four chambers a little bit. You could also see the valves. So these valves right here open and close, so the blood can't go from the ventricle back into the atrium. And when those veins open and then snap shut, that's what actually makes our heartbeat sound. We're actually hearing the valves right here snapping closed. Okay, so we can feel your pulse. That's the force of the blood being pumped out of your heart. We can measure your pulse, the electrical impulse, and then we can hear the beat with these valves snapping shut. All right. The blood is obviously a huge part of the circulatory system because that's the whole point, is to circulate the blood. And here we see a microscopic image of blood, we see red blood cells. That's all these small red ones. Some white blood cells here, which are kind of purple. And notice the purple have nuclei, the red do not. So red blood cells are actually anucleated, meaning they don't have a nucleus anymore, and that makes them disc-shaped. So they look spherical here in this picture, but they're actually flattened. They're round but flattened, and that's so that way they can take up less space. Okay. So here's the functions of the blood: delivers oxygen and nutrients, carries away waste. Very important not to forget that one. And then obviously has an important role in the immune system as well because we have white blood cells in there. All right, mostly our blood is plasma and red blood cells. Okay, about 55% plasma, and then then we have of this the cellular component, mostly red blood cells. Platelets are cell fragments that help with clotting. All right, and then we have white blood cells that usually are kept pretty low, but if you have an infection, then they obviously spike up. Plasma is kind of a yellowish liquid. It has a lot of dissolved proteins in it, and then obviously water. And so you can actually collect just plasma when you donate blood, and the red blood cells can be put back in your body, and that's what you see here. So this would be a plasma donation, and so they can use that if they need to, for different reasons, maybe increase blood volume. So they can sometimes use plasma without the red blood cells. All right, erythrocytes, those are red blood cells. That's just the fancy name for them. So notice that they are disc-shaped. You can see that right here. They don't have a nucleus. They don't have all that space taken up in the middle. And that way they can kind of squeeze through better and take up less space. And their main job is to transport oxygen. There's iron atoms inside that grab hold of oxygen atoms and then transform through the blood. Leukocytes, that's a fancy name for white blood cells. There's quite a few different types. We'll cover these a little more in the immune system. But they're going to detect pathogens, attack pathogens, keep your body free of anything that could cause disease. Platelets are cell fragments. They kind of have like a sticky property to them, so they can hold on to each other and stick together and form a clot. So they obviously prevent bleeding, and small cuts clot very, very quickly. Large cuts, sometimes take more time, but usually will still clot. If we don't have an arterial bleed, something that the pressure is so high we can't get the clot to form, then typically the clotting will prevent that person from bleeding out from a cut. We're going to skip through blood types since we did cover this earlier in the year with genetics, but I have it in the PowerPoint for you guys to remind yourself. So you see the different phenotypes here, the different blood types, the antigens or the proteins on the surface of each one, the antibodies, all right, that are very important for which blood types can accept what blood, okay. And then we see a little chart here. Okay, so that's all a reminder for you. Rh factor is also important. It's a different protein, but very similar to how it affects donations of blood and things like that. So you can be Rh positive for the protein or Rh negative. All right, and then lastly, we have some interactions. So all of these systems work together. They're not separate systems. They just each have their own unique role. So the circulatory system obviously interacts with the respiratory system. The respiratory system brings in the air, which contains the oxygen, which goes into the blood. Okay, the blood then brings the CO2 to the lungs, which then get rid of that CO2. So very important, and you can see how dense the blood vessels are in the lungs. So this is, if you've never seen this before, this is from the body exhibit. They take these bodies and they have this special way of taking tissue and turning it into like plastic, but it's real tissue. So these are real blood vessels that are preserved with this technique. And everything else has been removed, so you can actually see the blood vessels only. And so you see the more dense they are, in this picture, the more red you see, the more blood vessels in that area. So you can see all the blood vessels in the lung, and that's very important for exchanging the gases. So we have these sacs called alveoli. You can see the blood vessels surrounding the sac, and the oxygen and the CO2 exchange back and forth. Okay. Digestive system. So you can also see how dense we have around the digestive system here. So the stomach helps break down food, but it's really the small intestines. The stomach is going to be more kind of up in this area. And so all throughout your small intestines right here that's where the nutrients from the food are going to be absorbed into your blood, and then the blood then carries them around your body. So that's obviously an important function as well. So our small intestine has these little finger-like extensions called villi. The villi is surrounded by blood vessels right here, okay, and the nutrient exchange. So glucose and other things that we are getting from our food can go into our blood, and then from our blood can get to everywhere else in our body. All right, urinary system. So main interaction here is in waste removal. So the blood is going to carry some waste to the urinary system. The urinary system have these filtration units, okay, which help take things out of our blood, collect them and form urine, and then the urine travels out of your body, and then we get that waste out. So most of the waste is collected by your blood first, okay, and the blood then carries it to the kidneys. So you can see the interaction with the blood vessels on the outside, and then underneath that you can kind of see the kidney tissue there. Okay. And so here you can see a little bit more in detail these filtration units, the nephrons. We'll talk more about those in the urinary system PowerPoint, but for now you can kind of get a little sneak peek on that. Okay, and that's about it. So like I said, I'm going to go through it fast, short, and simple. The respiratory or the circulatory system is a pretty amazing system. We talked about how many blood vessels are in our body. The heart itself is incredible. I mean, it pumps literally from before you're born. I mean, from early in fetal development, nonstop your entire life. It can pump as many as uh, something like 2.5 billion times, and depending on how long you live, obviously, and how active you are and things like that. But just amazing to think, that a machine can continue to work ceaselessly like that for that long, and it can pump about 2,000 gallons of blood a day. So it's just an amazing machine. It's just an incredible system. So hopefully that helped a little bit, and we'll talk more about this later. But for now, I will let you guys get to work. All right, have a great one.